Hey, look everybody, it's Mark Hamill milking the franchise. Bye, Porgs. Star Wars: The Last Jedi, the 8th chapter in George Lucas's epic space saga, and yet somehow, it's the 10th theatrical film. Listen, I'm nuts for these movies, but if you're learning how to count, stick to Sesame Street. This is the only film series I can think of where you start with 4, 5, and 6, then go to 1, 2, and 3, and then you have a film that somehow ties into the series, but has no number, followed by 7, then another one that forgets to number itself, then 8. Huh? And newcomers to the franchise ask which movie they should watch first. Walmart released a special disc called The Story of Star Wars, which gives you the rundown of the first 6 movies in like half an hour. You know what? Stick to Wikipedia. You'll learn a whole lot in half the time and you won't be so damn confused. Anywho, let's talk about The Last Jedi, a film that has proven to be very divisive amongst its fans. Now, ever since Disney bought Lucasfilm, I've been making my own predictions, and for the most part, they've been spot on. I predicted that The Force Awakens would be the special film, the one that everyone loves, and then the quality would start to deteriorate, like a really juicy sub-sandwich that grows fungus over time. I enjoyed Rogue One, but for what it's worth, it didn't stick with me. Now for Last Jedi, yes, of course I was excited to see it. Every Star Wars fan was excited to see this movie. But Force Awakens started a trend of pleasing shareholders by getting these damn movies out as quickly as possible. J.J. Abrams made it feel like his film was the beginning of some long, planned-out story that had been gestating for years within the brain of George Lucas, and was finally getting the treatment that us geeks pined over for so long. And with Last Jedi, it was pretty much confirmed that there is no such long-term game plan, and that every director hired on to direct one of these films can pretty much do whatever the hell they want. So let me be frank. When I walked out of The Last Jedi after that first midnight screening, I wasn't a huge fan. In fact, I spent the majority of its theatrical run convincing myself that it kind of sucked. And I wasn't the only one who thought that. Even after watching it a second time, the film really didn't improve for me. The way I would describe Last Jedi is like this. Imagine going to your favorite all-you-can-eat buffet, but when you get there, they're out of all of your favorite foods. But you still have to pay the bill. That's what I felt like here. You know, for a film series that has been around for 40 years, there aren't that many installments. And still, there's a certain level of expectation we have whenever one of these films comes out, and lately it feels like the things we want aren't exactly being given to us. Well, let's look through this thing with a fine-toothed comb and see if there's any new nuggets of information. So, as most of you know, the film opens just minutes after The Force Awakens ends, which is a first for the series. Usually the story jumps ahead a couple of years, and in some cases, such as the gap between episodes 1 and 2, or episodes 3 and 4, it can skip decades. The the Resistance, has just taken a royal pounding from the Empire. The First Order. Gee, how could I confuse the different factions when everyone wears pretty much the same uniforms from 30 years ago? Now, when the credits rolled during that first screening and I turned to get a whiff of what different audience members thought of the film, one guy behind me actually stated that he liked it better than The Force Awakens merely because it was a more original film. This guy honestly should not be allowed to voice his opinion in a public forum because all Star Wars fans have seen a little-known movie called The Empire Strikes Back. And in case you've somehow gone brain dead in the last few years, let me refresh your memory. Do you remember how that movie started? It had the rebels escaping from the Empire, in virtually the same exact way that's portrayed here. You see these escape pods leaving the planet's surface? Let's do a side-by-side comparison, shall we? Gee, it's amazing how ignorant we become just with the passing of time, isn't it? I'll give Rian Johnson this. He made a very stunning film visually, but I wouldn't exactly say he took the franchise into a bold new direction. As a matter of fact, and I know I'm not the first guy to mention this, but what the hell? This movie is as much of a ripoff of Empire and Jedi as Force Awakens was of A New Hope. Even the dialogue is the same. Look, listen.
Complete your training and fulfill your destiny.
Rey, I want you to join me.
Luke is gone. I felt it.
The journey that Rey takes to try and turn Kylo Ren, Luke's place as the Wizard Jedi Master, the Battle of Crate with the Lance Beaters going up against the AT-ATs, and even one of my favorite scenes with the Millennium Falcon being pursued by TIE fighters in a tight trench. Entertaining, sure. New and innovative? I guess the Force really does have a strong influence on the weak-minded. One of my overall problems with the film was the central plot involving the Resistance trying to escape the clutches of the First Order by entering hyperspace. Essentially, the first two-thirds of this film are like watching the slowest chase sequence in movie history. But let's go back to Empire. Wasn't that movie a big chase sequence as well? With the third act taking place in a completely different location? However, it worked better in Empire because the monotony of evading Star Destroyers was broken up with different action sequences, the asteroid field, and the Minot Cave, not to mention actually arriving on Bespin. And that entire sequence in Cloud City had a lot of pitfalls too. With Last Jedi, I think the main problem with this exhilarating space chase is the pacing. Not a lot happens whenever the movie cuts back to this sequence, so it leads to some awkward storytelling. This, coupled with that whole Canto Bight sequence, really weakened the film. Ah, Canto Bight. A sequence so hated by my beloved Star Wars brethren that it sometimes gets compared to a scene right out of the prequels. Personally, I like the sequence. I like the look of the planet, I like the alien creatures. Hey, I'm the first to admit Return of the Jedi is my favorite Star Wars film, and that movie is like watching one big creature orgy. So I enjoyed the location. I just didn't feel like it had its place in this film. The reason for Finn and Rose to go there was contrived. It just seems like they have to travel so far just to find what amounts to a hacker, but just the fact that they go on this whole side quest because of a parking violation is fury-inducing. The slicer they do find, Benicio del Toro's DJ, was actually one of the more interesting characters of this film. But did anyone but me notice a resemblance to Lando Calrissian here? To everyone complaining that they want to see Lando come back, this guy is as close to a Lando clone as you're going to get. Awkward stuttering aside, he's a wild card with absolutely no allegiances whatsoever. I would not be surprised if he played a very Lando-like role in 9. He says it best.
They blow you up today, you blow them up tomorrow.
But that's also a weakness. The best parts of this movie tend to get shoved aside by weak sequences of a slow-ass space chase and this dumbass Canto Bight stuff. And DJ isn't the only character to get the middle finger salute. Captain Phasma doesn't quite get a miraculous recovery, does she? You've got to hand it to Gwendolyn Christie. She's the ultimate fan. First of all, she's won enough acclaim from her Game of Thrones gig that she really doesn't need this franchise to fall back on. And wearing that armor can't be easy. So to be featured in 2 of these films and to be booted off screen in ways that make Boba Fett's death scene look heroic by comparison takes a lot of commitment. Then there are characters that I loved in Force Awakens who kind of take a back seat this time around. I really wanted to see Finn and Rey go on another adventure together, or hell, even Finn and Poe. Well, we didn't really get that here, and I'm fine with that. Going through this film again, I realized that it wasn't their lack of screen time. They're both in this film pretty abundantly, but their overall story arcs just aren't as intriguing as the arc with Luke, Rey, and Kylo Ren, and that's the part of the story that I felt received the least bit of attention. In the film, Luke says he's going to give Rey 3 lessons about the Force. He gives her 2 of the 3 lessons before she ventures off and pretends to not copy Luke's character from Empire Strikes Back. I guess there's a deleted scene where we finally get to see what Luke's 3rd lesson is, but come on, that's some pretty inconsistent storytelling. Speaking of Luke, I guess one of fans' biggest problems with this movie is how Luke Skywalker is portrayed. You may not have liked how the character appears, but was it really that much of a surprise? Or do you just not pay attention to, anything that Han said in the prior film? He says it himself.
He was training a new generation of Jedi. One boy, an apprentice, turned against him and destroyed it all. Luke felt responsible. He just walked away from everything.
So after hearing that, why would you expect the youthful, spry farm boy from 30 years ago? Pay attention to the films you claim to love yet can't make decent arguments for. And then we have the new characters, namely Rose and Vice Admiral Holdo. Yes, both are women, and no, I'm not against half of the Resistance being led by women. Girl power, yay, and all of that. Now how about doing these women justice by actually writing some interesting characters for them? I like Laura Dern, but her character doesn't seem like a very strong leader. She spends a lot of the film standing by while the Resistance gets butchered, losing almost as many fighters as Poe does in the beginning. That's right, I said it. The very thing both Holdo and Leia are trying to teach Poe are the things they're failing at themselves, keeping people alive long enough to fight back. And what's the deal with Leia? I'm not knocking Carrie Fisher, God bless her, but Leia demotes Poe, after bitch-slapping him, mind you, telling him that he can't just jump in a ship and blow things up. And yet, just a few scenes later, what's this?
Permission to jump in an X-Wing and blow something up?
Permission granted.
What the? What just happened? Porgs. They suck. I hated them. Disney and Lucasfilm made it very obvious that the sole purpose of these ugly, obnoxious creatures was to sell ugly, obnoxious toys. The Ewoks sold toys. They also served a purpose in the story. You know, that whole helping the rebels take down the Empire thing? Pretty important plot point there. The Porgs were useless, and Chewie should have barbecued every one of those bastards. Then, instead of selling toys, they could have made bargains with fast food restaurants. You could go into KFC and order a bucket of fried porgs. How's that for marketing? Wouldn't you want to try porg marshmallow peeps this Easter? Now, I've saved this part for last. The twists. This is mostly where my opinion of The Last Jedi changes. We've conditioned ourselves to expect all kinds of twists in these films, even in the prequels when we pretty much knew what the outcome was going to be. I think the general consensus here was that Rian Johnson kind of knocked down our expectations by intentionally downplaying all the major plot points. A lot of fans, myself included, accused Johnson of throwing away a lot of what J.J. Abrams initially set up. Well, during my latest viewing of Last Jedi, I'm not sure I feel that way anymore. Sure, there are minor plot points that get ignored, but again, I think it all goes back to our expectations. Everyone loves to speculate about who these characters are, what their backstories are, so on and so on. By building up these ideas in our heads, we sometimes get the false impression that we saw all these things in the movie. But think about it. In The Force Awakens, we're actually told very little about anything. No one ever alluded to who Snoke really was, we're given next to nothing about Rey's parentage, and come on, think about it. How much did the fabled Knights of Ren really play into the story? Go back and watch that film again and tell me how important they really are to that movie. And don't forget, this is a trilogy, as in try, as in 3. So if my calculations are correct, we have 7, we have 8. Oh yeah, there's a 9 coming out around the corner, isn't there? So who knows, maybe Last Jedi is just a smaller piece in a bigger puzzle. Another complaint I had was that Last Jedi feels like a very self-contained movie. It feels like it had closure. But wait, don't we usually get a big cliffhanger in the second act? Empire had it. Come to think of it, so did Attack of the Clones. The movie ended with that little boy doing his Force chores, and I was like, well, what the hell are they going to do in the next one? Well, it's like Luke says.
The war is just beginning. And I will not be the last Jedi.
A lot of fans speculate, again there's that magical word, that the little boy will play a big part. Maybe, maybe not. But it kind of suggests that Rey is going to play the part of the Jedi teacher who passes on what Luke learned. I think that's why they revealed that Rey took the Jedi texts. I'm a little upset that Luke wasn't the one who actually passed on his wisdom to Rey, but from what I've heard, Hamill still has a part to play in 9, so maybe there's still room for redemption. And if anything else, the franchise is called Star Wars, so as long as there are wars in space, anything's possible with this franchise. One last thing I want to comment on is that last climactic battle on Crate. First of all, I never noticed this before, but this is the goriest battle I've ever seen for a PG-13 rated movie. It was a brilliant move on Johnson's part to make a planet with red sand. Look at this battlefield during the battle between Kylo Ren and Luke. It looks like blood was shed everywhere, like Jason Voorhees came through here and just slashed up a bunch of horny desert teenagers. Or maybe it's just the planet's time of the month, who knows. Even as Luke and Kylo are fighting each other, it almost looks like they're dealing out some pretty violent blows, just because the sand is freaking red. Genius. Of course, there's Luke's epic death scene, which is both touching when he gives his farewell to Leia, and also a bit confusing when we realize that the act of transporting his virtual self across the galaxy is actually fatal. But wait, Kylo does prepare us for this, pretty early on in the film actually.
You're not doing this. The effort would kill you.
And even in the theater, I thought the image of Luke looking on into the sunset as he drifts off into the Force was beautiful. So, do I really have the same problem with this as I did back in theaters on day one? I'm on the fence about it, but I'm leaning more toward no. As in, I'm kind of fine with it now. This is a movie that really plays on expectations, and I realized that once I got over the lackluster twists, once I knew all the plot lines and I could just enjoy the film for what it was, I was able to finally get some enjoyment out of it. is a movie where you have to pay attention to certain bits of dialogue, and yes, there's way too much stuff going on here. If you ever got the chance to read one of the earlier Timothy Zahn novels from the 90s, it kind of feels like Johnson was trying to adapt those to film. Certain plot points, like the search for a slicer and the capture of a dreadnought, were key plot points in those books. And in a lot of ways, this movie is being heralded as a major step forward for Star Wars films when, truthfully, in terms of its plot, it doesn't really seem all that important in the grand scheme of things. I'd go as far as to compare it to Attack of the Clones. It serves as the middle act of a trilogy, it's lighthearted and fun, but at the end of the day, it may only serve as a bridge between 7 and 9. And hell, for all we know, with J.J. Abrams back at the helm, 9 could be something really special. I won't hold my breath, but I will admit Last Jedi is starting to grow on me a bit by bit. Hell, one day I might even like this movie. All I can say is, you've got nothing to lose by giving it another chance.